Hi, everybody. I'm Christa Strickler, and I am Associate Professor of Library Science and also Resource Description Librarian at Wheaton College in the state of Illinois in the United States. And as part of the Library of Congress program for cooperative cataloging, Wikidata pilot project, I did a project focusing on Christian hymns. So our library has a collection of over 2,000 Protestant Christian hymnals in our special collections, ranging from the 1750s to the present, and mostly focusing on American hymnody, but also representing some global hymnody. So I wanted to link metadata on the hymnals in our special collections to items in Wikidata using identifiers from the Library of Congress and hymnary.org, which is a comprehensive index of data on hymns and is a major source of information for hymn scholars. My project scope was a contemporary hymnal, which I chose over our rare hymnals because I could work on it from home during the pandemic. Other than that, I had no plan. After all, how hard could it be? Well, this hymnal has 852 hymns for starters. I started at the beginning of the hymnal and started working my way through, hymn by hymn, and I quickly realized this was more complicated than I had imagined. Not only were there 852 hymns, but I also had to consider composers and hymn writers and translators, and then there were the data modeling challenges. The first challenge is that one hymn does not equal one Wikidata item, or maybe it does. One way of looking at a hymn is to see it as one entity, basically like a song. However, from an academic and liturgical viewpoint, hymns are more like two entities, a text and a tune, and you can mix and match these text and tune pairings if they have the same hymn meter, which is the number of syllables for the lines in each stanza. This second version is how hymnary.org models it, and it uses identifiers for both text and tune. This was also how I wanted to model the data because that's how scholars would likely want to use it. But this causes some problems for hymns that are already in Wikidata. A good example of this is the hymn Amazing Grace. This item was modeled like the first example that I showed you. It's one hymn. It's usually sung to the same tune. But not always. According to hymnary.org, the Amazing Grace text has been paired with over 140 different tunes. So it would be incorrect for me to link this hymn item to a hymnal item when the hymnal uses a different tune from the traditional one. I could split up the Wikidata item into two, except somebody has gone to a lot of trouble to link this to other items in a way that only works if this is modeled as a single hymn. They've linked it to various performers, such as Louis Armstrong, an American jazz musician. And they've linked it to various hymnals and songbooks, and I don't want to break that up without considering the ramifications for other people's work. Hymnary.org gets around this problem by having a hymn instance with its own identifier for each time a particular combination of text and tune is published in a hymnal. I've thought about doing this as well, but I wonder if it's appropriate for how Wikidata works. If I were to implement it, for example, there would be at least 132 instance items titled Amazing Grace in Wikidata, which would make it difficult for people wanting to find other items with that title, such as the album by Aretha Franklin, an American singer. I still don't have a solution to this challenge. Another challenge is that there are few items related to hymns in Wikidata, so there was no data model to draw from, and what was there was modeled inconsistently. As one example, within the item for Amazing Grace, John Newton, who wrote the text, is listed as an author, a librettist, and a lyricist. So I needed to figure out which property seemed the most appropriate. So I started creating my own data models as I went. On my PCC Wikidata pilot page, there are now models for composers and hymn writers, hymn texts, and hymn tunes. Composers and hymn writers were not very difficult in terms of choosing properties, but sometimes appropriate values were a challenge, such as figuring out the abbreviations for unfamiliar academic degrees. So I started recording common values used as well. Hymn texts and tunes were more challenging to model because there weren't many examples in Wikidata to draw from. The models I've created are also a bit simple, so I may need to propose new properties, such as one for hymn meter, to make them more useful, but I haven't had time to tackle that yet. Other modeling challenges I've encountered include the use of multiple languages in the same hymn instance. For example, in the hymnal I'm working on, Amazing Grace includes translations in Creek, Navajo, and Cherokee in addition to the original English. It would be useful for scholars to track the appearance of alternate languages, so I would like to find a way to figure out how to model this. Also, in some cases, the text has been changed from the original to reflect gender-neutral language. Do I want to model that or leave it as is? Also, sometimes there are multiple harmonizations of the same tune. Do I want to reflect that or leave it as is? These are decisions I still have to make. I've recorded these data modeling conundrums on my project talk page in case anyone wants to weigh in on them. I have learned a few lessons along the way. After a while of going through hymns one by one, I realized that jumping back and forth between composers and texts and tunes slowed me down. So I decided that working on one type of item at a time was more efficient. So I'm now focused on entering composers and hymn writers, and I will connect the texts and tunes to them later. Another lesson is that I don't have to craft a perfectly detailed item from the beginning. At first, I was careful to add every possible property to the items I created and enhanced, but that slowed down progress on the project. So I'm now prioritizing essential properties, such as identifiers, and making sure I include enough information to help alleviate any notability concerns. And then I move on to the next item. I've now learned how to use Listeria to generate a list of items I've created, and I can use that to monitor data completeness and know where to focus on enhancements later. Also, even when focusing on items for people, working on them one by one was still a slow process. So I figured out how to download a CSV file from hymnary.org of all the people associated with the hymnal that I was working on. Then I uploaded the data into OpenRefine and reconciled the list with Wikidata, which saved me some time searching for each person. And I'm now using this list to track my progress. Next, I plan to figure out a batch uploading workflow using OpenRefine and quick statements. Another lesson I learned is that queries can demonstrate data gaps. Thanks to some basic Sparkle queries, which are linked from my project page, I can now see that the majority of the hymn writers and composers in my project were born in the United Kingdom, Western Europe, and the East Coast of the United States. Similarly, nationality of these people is most commonly the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. And the language spoken or written by the majority of the hymn writers is English, with German coming in second but still far behind. While this data set is still very incomplete and only represents partial work from one hymnal, clearly more work needs to be done to better represent the true diversity of global hymnody. Because of this data gap, I have started using my project page to compile a list of sources that could be useful for diversifying the coverage of hymns in Wikidata. Working through some of these sources would help fill knowledge gaps regarding underrepresented cultures on Wikidata. And then the data visualizations would better represent the vast variety in global hymnody. Thank you very much, and there is my contact information if anybody wants to get in touch with me.